Welcome back and thanks for staying with us. So the big story this morning, a full bench in the Pretoria High Court has ordered government to ensure that public hospitals, clinics, schools and police stations essentially are exempt from load shedding. The court concluded that the state breached its constitutional and statutory duties and that these breaches were infringing on citizens' rights to healthcare, education and security. Let's continue getting reaction for you now. Our guest is Imphiwe Gada. He is Denosa Gauteng provincial chair and joins us via our video link. Imphiwe, it's lovely to see you, sir. Thanks very much indeed for making time. It goes without saying that Denosa would welcome a ruling like this. But the question this morning is, how confident are you that it will make any difference in a context where we now know that the presidency is likely to appeal it?
Well, good morning to the viewers and thank you for inviting us. Well, indeed, we do welcome this ruling because it's part of what, as an organization, as a stakeholder in the health sector, we've been calling for, informed by the experiences that our members are exposed to at the level of the hospital, but also informed by the struggle that patients are exposed to. I mean, we know that load shedding damages infrastructure. But the added burden to the Department of Health now is that the Department of Health has got to set aside an amount in the excess of millions, which could be diverted into improving the services that are given to the citizens, which now must go on to purchase diesel, which is something that we never imagined would happen, that a hospital would have to ring-fence money to buy diesel, instead of that money hiring more staff or buying more medicine, or even getting more beds for the patient. So this is something that, one, we frown upon. If government even files those papers, it would be an indication to South Africans that this government has got no intention of ending load shedding, because this is a very fair and just call that also relied upon the constitution of this country, which guarantees every citizen of this country access to quality health care. Now, we know that load shedding has actually infringed on this right because sometimes systems crash and patients have got to then be seen come back at a later stage, which then, bends another pocket in the whole of patients financially, because now we don't only give access to healthcare, but now the healthcare then becomes also expensive. So this is something that we welcome. And in fact, the Minister of Health had, applied that schools, hospitals, schools and so forth be exempted. However, the funny thing I understand is that there was a debate now between ESCOM and the department as to who must purchase the cables to redirect or take off the hospitals from the grid. And this clearly shows you that we are in a crisis as a country, because for us, during the time that EFF was going to go on a national march, them not switching off the lights was also an acknowledgement that electricity is essential, one, to the security of the country, because they needed to keep the lights on so that they can be able to effectively, provide safety for the citizens and also for the hospitals. So we don't think that there is any reason that can be submitted in any South African court that can justify why you do not want these essential services to be exempted from load shedding. I mean, during COVID, these services were also listed as essential services. During the strike, these same services, we were then told that these are essential services. Maybe government must then clarify what is its understanding of the word essential.
Right. It's a good point to make. In fact, the logic set out by the court is also one that's quite easy to track, right? There are very clear constitutional obligations that are being infringed upon if these institutions don't have electricity. The complexity, though, comes in when you start considering the competing interests, even constitutionally speaking. As you mentioned, if there are alternatives that are going to have to be provided by the government, that money is going to have to come from somewhere. And as you already stated, the health department is already struggling to meet demand as it is. Where do you envision that kind of support should come from, if you know what I mean?
Well, it's where we envision it is that it's going to oppress the same majority that is poor, because this money will be told that must come off the taxpayers, and there is a department somewhere that is going to struggle, because we need to then supply alternative forms of energy, of which this is something that we find to be quite unfair and unjust, because when the demand for the usage of electricity was rising as and when there were new developments that were being built and approved, one of our long-held view and strong conviction is that government ought to have planned better, ought to have anticipated that in the next 20 years, in the next 30 years, we'd be sitting where we're sitting. Actually, we are told that government was warned about this stage that we're in now, that as electricity demand rises, we'll then face this kind of challenge if we remain at the same levels of production. That is why you saw the sanctioning of Medupi, the sanctioning of Kusile. Unfortunately, the biggest threat to our democracy was then allowed to chip in, which is that of corruption. And our view is that even the issue of electricity is threatening our democracy, because at some point people are going to revolt, because electricity is essential to have. I mean, other forms, if you buy gas, for instance, it's expensive. You rely on diesel, it's expensive. You rely on petrol if you've got a diesel, a generator at home, it's expensive. So when people can no longer breathe, they are going to revolt. And when people are even in hospitals but they face blackouts, it's going to be a difficult challenge, which the government would find it very difficult to manage. But we hope that sanity will prevail. We hope that government will have the same level of understanding that we have as to why is it important to keep the lights on in the hospital, especially in the hospitals. You know, we can argue and make other means at a school and say and make other means because there's no life that is a threat. But at a hospital, you've got many machines that are running, which are saving people's lives, which essentially means that we need that electricity to be on a continuous basis, because this on and off also damages some of the equipment in the hospitals, and the Department of Health now ends up having to replace machines at a much shorter time span, of which this places more burden on the already underfunded Department of Health, because the Department of Health in the various provinces, in Gauteng, Eastern Cape, wherever, are underfunded.
Right.
We are crying of shortage and so forth. So the situation of load shedding has actually made things worse in terms of competing priorities.
Yeah. I wonder whether, at least from your line of work, you've been able to quantify the impact of load shedding yet. And it's a difficult question that I ask because, I mean, where do we even begin, right? Even in any sector, let alone in health.
Well, it has been a very difficult and daunting exercise to quantify the impact, because remember, the Department of Health extends to your home. Because the Department of Health is about the wellness of South Africans. There are those patients who are chronic patients, who are outpatients, who only come once or twice to the hospital or to the clinic for checkups. And then they are sent home, whether on oxygen that is run through a machine that is operated through electricity and so forth. You and I have seen many stories where we are told a patient that was at home, because the load shedding came at a time that was not scheduled and the family was unprepared, and then the machine went off and then the patient died. So we have seen such stories. So that's why I'm saying it's difficult to quantify, because we've got many patients who are affected both inside the hospital and outside the hospital. So we have had many deaths. We have experienced deaths that have happened because of load shedding. But it then becomes difficult to reconcile all that data and put it on the table and say this one because of this, because as and when it happens and as and when you are looking for the data, you find that the family is upset to even cooperate, to give information and so forth. So, but the truth of the matter is that, yes, indeed, load shedding has got a very negative impact as far as delivering quality healthcare services to South Africans.
Loud and clear. Imphiwe Gada, thanks very much indeed for speaking to us. Really appreciate your reaction today. Imphiwe is the Denosa Gauteng provincial chairperson, giving us his take now that the Pretoria High Court has essentially ruled that government should take active steps in the next 60 days to exempt hospitals, public schools, clinics and police stations from load shedding. The presidency says they're appealing, so it's a story that's no way far